Announcement this morning moving toward that 4 days and 5 days of in-person learning. That's something that parents have been asking for a long time now, and this isn't for all students, but right. What changed that made you feel comfortable with moving forward at least a little bit?
The success that we had with the one-day plan that will allow us to quickly transition to a two-day plan, that really set the stage for us feeling comfortable to move forward with other groups where we can keep in place the safeguards we need to have for their health. And that's, maintaining 6 feet of social distancing like we are now, or wearing a mask when you can't do that, frequently washing and sanitizing your hands, and people don't feel well and need to stay at home. So I can't say enough about how well our students, our parents, and our employees supported and did all those things. And that gave us the confidence to continue to move forward where we can keep people safe, but we can have them in school with greater frequency. Now, when we move beyond the groups we talked about earlier today and the announcement that we made, that becomes more and more difficult.
So do you have a timeline in place? Possibly nothing concrete, but right. Any ideas on when you can expand on that even further? Because we've kind of seen this phased approach, this phased rollout.
Right, and you heard us say today pre-K and kindergarten, but not yet announcing a timeline, which we hope to do within the next 10 days. And while we're looking at those, we're also looking at second grade. When I say looking at that, looking at all the logistics around that. Is it possible to find some way to accommodate those students in their classroom and keep the 6 feet of social distancing? Now, what we might hope to happen in the next several weeks, perhaps we could reach a point where that's no longer a recommendation. Don't know the likelihood of that. I think you have to get to extremely low numbers for that to happen. The other possibility that presents itself is you'll see places around the country that have utilized some barriers, plexiglass barriers. Right now, DHEC, our state public health agency, their recommendation and their direction regarding that is that it will likely and probably, they use them in two different sentences, but likely or probably be effective. Well, likely, probably, I think strikes most people, that's better than 50%. So that's 51% or somewhere north of there. We don't feel that comfortable risking health at 51%. We need a little better quantifying of that. And we hope that we may get that from DHEC. In fact, we've had conversations with them and have another conversation really scheduled with them later this week. If that can be in place in lieu of 6 feet, that could help us to advance this through at least second grade, third grade, and maybe even upper elementary. Beyond that, it even becomes a less effective strategy. We talk about middle school and high school. At middle school and high school, we can get about 17 students in a room maintaining 6 feet. Using those plexiglass barriers, you could increase that number a little bit, but they still have to have room to move around. And high school and middle school students change classes frequently during the day. Unlike elementary, where we bring them in and we can keep them in their own little self-contained group all day long. They don't even go, if they go to related arts, when they go to art or PE, they go as a group. Middle school and high school in particular, because you may, as a high school student, you might go to a second period class and there's nobody in that class that was in your first period. So you can't keep these cohort groups together. Now, we don't talk a lot about that, but DHEC and CDC recommend that you keep people in cohorts. So we can't maintain a cohort group in there. You think about literally the size of high school and middle school students, how much more crowded that room is, because a high school room is the same size as a fourth grade classroom. The students are significantly larger. And we have at the high school level about 1,500 classes that have more than 21 in them. And at the middle school level, we have nearly 1,000 that have more than 21 in them. And we have classes. Now, again, we're not talking about PE or band or chorus, the ones that people think about with a lot of students in them. But we have classes in the 30s at middle and high school. They don't tend to be our four core classes, but they are certainly classes that generally everybody in the school may be in a class like that. So there are really different challenges at middle and high school. Now the upside to that is, we believe certainly, and our experience shows that it is least impactful for those students to be at home part of the time as opposed to elementary students, from a supervision standpoint and from their ability to work more independently.
So what would it take to get those high school and those middle school students back in class for even 5 days a week? And do you see that happening this semester?
I think beyond the Career Center Level 2, and then we'll next look at Career Center Level 1, because of the size of those classes and the size, obviously them being larger, of their classrooms, because they have labs and shops. Beyond that, it'd be extremely challenging to get to that point until we reach a point where the virus level might be at such a point that it would be safe for them to do it without the 6 feet. Because the barriers then, they also become a barrier to students' movement in and out of the room. The difference in the size of students makes the barrier have to be larger. One of the real negatives with using plexiglass barriers has to do with disrupting airflow in the room. Now with an elementary student, you can imagine how short elementary students are. Talking about putting something on a tabletop, minimal disruption to airflow. You talk about a much larger student, it takes up a much larger space, height-wise. There might even be a need for it to go all the way to the floor for stability. And you still, even with the plexiglass barriers, what it lets you do is group students in clusters of say 4, but you still have to maintain 6 feet to the next cluster. So when you get in those bigger numbers, even using them, if it didn't disrupt airflow, it didn't create other issues, it just becomes, at this point, based on our early look at all that, it's not at this point a viable solution for getting everybody back in, because everybody means those students that are in those really large classes as well.
Are you considering at all possibly for those older students where it's not feasible yet to do 4 or 5 days a week, alternating Fridays in person? I know that's something other districts have looked at, and they've seemed to have success with that.
Right. Here's the problem, and it's hard to speak to what other districts do, because sometimes they're doing or not doing other things that allow them to do what you're talking about. Well, in our district, we created a separate virtual program, so the people who want 100% virtual have that. So at the elementary level and at the middle school level, we have teachers dedicated 100% to teaching those virtual students. They don't have any in-person students that they're responsible for. There are very few exceptions with some special needs students, but very few at the middle school level, some exceptions. At the high school level, every high school faculty, there are teachers who are teaching both in person and virtual. So that's a complication that exists there that doesn't exist at the other 2 levels. The other thing, no matter what level, if you have students coming 2 days and 2 groups come in 2 days together, then 2 groups come in 2 days together, then you bring everybody on Friday, the teacher has no availability to work virtually with the group on the 2 days they're not there. So even though you're bringing them back 3 days, they would have to work basically completely independently on the other 2 days that they're not in school. And we believe the downside of that exceeds the upside of it.